They tried to bury me in silence for decades, but I came back with evidence that shattered everything. I remember that morning with a clarity that still haunts me. The sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, warm and innocent, while inside the air was heavy with tension I couldn't yet name. My mother looked at me, her eyes cold and calculating, the kind of look that carries a lifetime of judgment in a single glance. She said it so casually that it almost sounded like a suggestion. We all agreed. "You're not welcome here anymore." I froze. My mind raced, but my voice betrayed nothing. I didn't scream, I didn't beg. I stood there like a statue, pretending I hadn't heard, while every word sank into me like a stone in deep water. The kitchen felt smaller, the walls closing in, and I realized in that instant that nothing would ever be the same. Every smile, every family tradition, every celebration I had once cherished was now a memory I was being forced to abandon. My father didn't say a word. He simply stared at the table, pretending to sip his coffee. My siblings exchanged glances, half amused, half indifferent, as if this had been rehearsed for weeks. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to demand answers, but I couldn't. I knew that. Any reaction, any display of hurt would give them the satisfaction they were seeking. So I did the only thing I could think of. I turned away, walked out of the house that had been my world, and stepped into a silence that felt colder than any winter. That day, I was not just excluded from a home, I was erased from a life that I had assumed was mine. And yet, even as the door closed behind me, a spark of defiance flickered inside. I didn't know then how far this would go. I didn't know how long the silence would last, or what secrets lay buried beneath the smiles and the casual cruelty. But I knew one thing. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. And if they thought they could erase me completely, they were about to find out that some fires never go out. Little did I know, the journey I was about to undertake would stretch across decades, testing every ounce of patience, resilience, and courage I possessed. And it would all start with that single, devastating morning. From that moment on, I learned to watch, to listen, and to prepare. Every laugh, every passing remark, every carefully staged gesture would reveal the cracks in their facade. And those cracks would become my weapon. The moment I stepped out of that house, the world felt both empty and sharp. I had nowhere to go, yet every street, every alley, every passing stranger seemed to whisper that I didn't belong. I carried nothing but a small backpack and the weight of being invisible in the eyes of the people who should have loved me unconditionally. Wandered through the city, the familiar landmarks turning into strangers. Cafes, parks, even the corner store held memories I was no longer allowed to claim. Every laugh I overheard reminded me of the celebrations I had been barred from, and every glance seemed to pierce through me, questioning why I hadn't fought harder, why I hadn't begged for my place back. I found refuge in the shadows, in quiet libraries and empty benches, anywhere that offered anonymity. I slept on worn couches, borrowed floors, and sometimes, when the night was too bitter, I simply curled up in my coat on the steps of closed shops. Hunger gnawed at me, but it was nothing compared to the emptiness of being erased from the one life I thought I could never lose. It wasn't just absence. It was intentional, systematic. They had erased my presence so thoroughly that even my friends from school didn't call, didn't ask. I realized then that being cast out wasn't just about a single day. It was a campaign designed to strip me of identity, to force me to shrink until I no longer existed in the spaces they occupied. But in the exile, I found something unexpected: clarity. The silence around me forced me to listen to my own thoughts, to remember who I was beneath their judgment and cruelty. I began to map the patterns of their lives from afar, noting every inconsistency, every slip, every carefully hidden resentment. Their perfection was an illusion, and I was beginning to see the cracks they had tried so desperately to hide. Every night, I sketched possibilities in my mind. Small acts, careful maneuvers, the ways I could reclaim what was taken. I wasn't safe, not yet, but I was no longer helpless. I was learning patience, observation, and the art of surviving without their validation. And as I planned quietly, I knew that the day I returned, I wouldn't come back as the person they tried to erase. I would come back as someone they couldn't ignore, someone who had the power to expose the truth of their calculated cruelty. The exile wasn't just punishment, it was my crucible. And as the weeks turned into months, I realized that in the silence of being forgotten, I was preparing for a reckoning that no one in that house would ever see coming. Years passed like a slow tide, and with every passing day, the silence from my family grew heavier, almost tangible. It wasn't just that they ignored me, it was as if I had been erased from history itself. Birthdays, graduations, holidays, weddings, each milestone became a phantom, a reminder of a life I was never allowed to share. I began to measure time not by the calendar, but by the absence of their voices, their messages, their concern. The world around me moved forward, but my name never surfaced in their conversations. I discovered old photographs, letters, and mementos in abandoned boxes at relatives' houses, relics of a life I had once belonged to. They had preserved every detail except the memory of me. Every glimpse into the past was a cruel contradiction. I had existed, I had mattered, and yet they had chosen to erase all proof of it from the present. People asked me why I never tried to reach them. The truth was, the more I reached, the more I realized the void was deliberate. Every unanswered letter, every blocked call, every turning away was evidence of a design I could not ignore. I had been punished not by circumstance, but by intention. Decades of carefully constructed silence, a punishment that left scars deeper than any visible wound. Yet, in that silence, I grew resilient. I learned to rely on no one but myself, to trust my instincts, and to observe quietly. I watched the world, watched patterns of betrayal, subtle lies, and hidden resentments in those around me, and slowly the pieces began to form a picture. Their perfection was a facade, and I was finally beginning to see the cracks, the truths that even time could not fully hide. Even so, the silence had a weight that never lifted. Some nights, I dreamed of confronting them, of walking into their lives with a voice they could no longer ignore. Other nights I felt a hollow rage, wondering how people could be so devoted to appearances that they willingly abandoned the very person who gave them love without condition. But the years had also given me patience, and patience became a weapon. I realized that when the time came, I wouldn't need to force my way back into their lives. The silence they had created could be turned against them. Every hidden resentment, every small betrayal I had witnessed from afar, every unspoken truth would one day surface, and I would be ready. And so, as I looked back on the decades of absence, I understood something chilling. The silence was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning, a dark prelude to the reckoning I had been preparing for in the shadows, quietly and meticulously, all along. I never imagined the day I would return. After decades of being erased, I had built a life on my own terms, far from their shadow, far from their orchestrated silences. And yet, something inside me demanded closure, a reckoning, not just for myself, but for the truth they had buried. The moment I stepped back into the town I once called home, memories collided with reality. The streets had changed, houses repainted, new families moving in. But the echoes of my past were everywhere. I could feel the invisible lines connecting me to the life they had tried to erase. Every familiar corner, every faded landmark was a reminder that they had never truly removed me from existence. I didn't rush. I watched first. I observed patterns, who answered my absence with feigned ignorance, who remembered more than they should. I noticed the subtle reactions, the hesitation, the almost imperceptible tension in voices, the way old acquaintances avoided certain topics. It was all there, hiding behind polite smiles and curated memories. And then I began to move quietly, deliberately. A message here, a call there, leaving breadcrumbs to see who would pick them up, who would slip, who would reveal a trace of guilt. I didn't need confrontation yet. The return itself was a statement, a whisper in the corridors of their carefully constructed lives. My presence alone was enough to unsettle them. The first encounter was unavoidable. A neighbor, someone who had known my family intimately, froze when our eyes met. For a moment, I saw the recognition and panic flicker across a face trained to ignore me for decades. It was intoxicating, a taste of power I hadn't felt in years. I realized then that the world I thought had moved on without me had been holding its breath, waiting for my shadow to reappear. But this was just the beginning. The return wasn't about revenge yet. It was about gathering, understanding, and positioning myself. Every whispered secret, every hidden resentment, every misremembered story was a piece of the puzzle I was now reclaiming. I was back, and I was no longer invisible. As the day faded into evening, I walked past the house I had grown up in. The windows reflected a world I no longer belonged to, yet I felt a thrill. They had built walls to keep me out, but walls only work if you never find a way back in, and I had found mine. The return had begun, but the reckoning, the exposure of decades-long deceit, was still waiting in the shadows. Each step forward was a step closer to revealing the truth, and I could feel the tension tightening around. Those who had erased me, they didn't know it yet, but the game had changed. I had accepted the invitation to dinner, though I knew it was a calculated risk. Sitting at the table that once defined my place in the family, now a stage for judgment and whispers, I felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and dread. The house smelled the same, faintly of roasted chicken and buttered vegetables, as if time had paused just to greet me. My parents sat at opposite ends, their eyes flicking toward me, scanning, measuring, weighing the years I had been gone. My siblings exchanged glances that said more than words ever could, a silent communication born from shared complicity. The room was polished and bright, yet each smile was laced with tension, every compliment tasting faintly of suspicion. I chose my words carefully, keeping my voice calm, soft even, while letting the weight of my absence speak louder than any accusation I could make. I listened to their polite chatter, stories of holidays I never attended, achievements I had been erased from, and failures they had conveniently rewritten. I noticed how my mother's hand trembled when she poured the wine, how my father's gaze lingered too long on the empty seat beside him, as if remembering someone who should not have been forgotten. Then came the first test. My sister, the one who had once wielded control over me like a weapon, asked casually about a childhood incident I had no memory of. Her tone was light, almost playful, but the underlying threat was clear. She wanted to see if I would falter. If the years had softened me, if I would accept their narrative without challenge. I didn't flinch. I corrected her gently, recounting the story as it had truly happened, the details unmistakable. The silence that followed was delicious. She had expected compliance. Instead, I had returned with clarity, precision, and a quiet, undeniable authority. The dinner continued, each course another battleground. Compliments were given, retracted, and replaced with subtle digs, each one a reminder of the years he had tried to erase me. Yet with every exchange, I felt myself reclaiming pieces of myself I had thought lost forever. Each memory they tried to manipulate, each story they distorted, became ammunition in my silent, invisible war. And as the evening drew to a close, I realized the table had shifted. It was no longer theirs alone. My presence had changed the balance. Their carefully curated world had cracks now, tiny fissures that had been impossible to see before. I could see the fear in fleeting glances, the unease beneath forced laughter. They had invited me back, but they had forgotten. I was no longer the person they once controlled. As I left the table and walked into the quiet of the hallway, I felt the first stirrings of what would come next. The lies were fragile, the truths were powerful, and the real reckoning was only just beginning. The shadows of the past were stirring, and I was ready to bring them into the light. I couldn't sleep that night. The echoes of the dinner table clung to me, the polite smiles that were anything but, the subtle jabs disguised as conversation. Something about the way my sister's eyes lingered on me, sharp and calculating, wouldn't leave my mind. I knew there was more beneath the surface, more than polite pretense or old grudges. I needed answers. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the floorboards under my feet. I moved carefully, almost instinctively, drawn toward the rooms that had once been off-limits. And then I found it, the study my parents always said was just for bills and old paperwork. Inside, it looked ordinary at first, but as I rifled through stacks of papers, letters, and forgotten journals, a pattern began to emerge. My parents hadn't just excluded me. They had been plotting, quietly and methodically, to erase me from the family narrative entirely. There were letters to distant relatives, carefully worded messages that twisted the truth about me, letters designed to make me seem unreliable, selfish, even dangerous. I found photos, too, some torn, some defaced, some altered, images of me, at family gatherings that never actually happened, captions in my mother's handwriting that painted me as a villain in my own story. And the worst of it? Notes from my sister, detailed, precise, and merciless, tracking every move I had made in the last decade, anticipating my return as though she had been waiting for the right moment to strike. My hands shook as I pieced it together. Every whispered insult, every exclusion, every carefully timed manipulation. It wasn't random. It was orchestrated. And it wasn't just about jealousy or rivalry. They had feared me, feared what I might discover, feared what I could reclaim if I ever came back. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was tangible, deliberate, and suffocating. I felt the weight of years of lies pressing down on me. But amidst the anger and the shock, something else rose, a cold, sharp clarity. Now I knew exactly why I had been erased. Now I knew the stakes. Left the study with the evidence clutched tightly in my hands, my mind racing. This was no longer just about family grudges or childhood slights. This was about uncovering the truth, exposing the deception, and reclaiming the life they had tried so hard to rewrite. As I moved silently through the darkened hallways, I could almost hear their laughter from the dinner table echoing like a challenge. They had set the stage, but the next act, the revelation, was mine to control. And when the daylight came, nothing would ever be the same. I didn't know who I could trust. After uncovering the extent of their schemes, everyone in my family felt like a potential enemy. Every smile seemed rehearsed, every word carefully measured. But then, unexpectedly, a message arrived. A single envelope slid under my door in the dead of night. No signature, just a note in familiar handwriting. Meet me at the old park, midnight, alone. My heart raced as I considered the possibilities. A trap? A prank? Or perhaps an ally? I had learned long ago that family could be as dangerous as any stranger, yet something about the handwriting, the curves, the careful loops, tugged at a memory I couldn't quite place. When I arrived, the park was shrouded in fog, the swings swaying gently in the breeze. A shadow emerged from behind an old oak tree. My breath caught. It was my cousin Alex, the one who had always been quiet, who had never taken sides publicly. He looked at me with a mix of fear and determination. "I've been watching," he whispered, barely moving his lips. I couldn't stand by anymore. I know what they've done to you, and I have information that will help you. But you need to be careful. They're watching every move. He handed me a small flash drive. Everything you found is just the beginning. There are hidden accounts, messages, and documents, things even your sister didn't want you to see. If we put this together, we can finally expose them. Relief and disbelief collided inside me. After years of isolation, betrayal, and silence, someone from the inside was finally on my side. Alex explained quietly, almost conspiratorially, that he had been secretly collecting evidence for months, documenting conversations, financial transfers, and manipulations. Every piece of the puzzle I had feared might be lost forever had a counterpart, proof that could turn the tables. I realized then that the story wasn't just about my survival. It was about uncovering the truth that had been buried beneath decades of lies. With Alex's help, I could confront them with facts they couldn't ignore, truths they couldn't rewrite. We parted with a nod, the weight of the coming days heavy in our hearts. I walked back through the fog, clutching the flash drive, feeling a mix of fear and newfound resolve. Their plans had been meticulous, but they hadn't accounted for one thing: an ally who understood the stakes and a determination I could no longer suppress. As I returned home, I knew the next step would be the most dangerous yet, standing face to face with them, armed not with anger alone, but with the evidence that could finally dismantle their empire of deceit. The confrontation was coming, and this time, I wouldn't be alone. The night I plugged the flash drive into my laptop, I felt a jolt of anticipation, tempered by the familiar sting of dread. The files were there, thousands of emails, bank statements, private messages, recordings, each one a thread, and together they formed a tapestry of deception I had only glimpsed before. I opened a folder labeled Family Secrets, and my heart sank. Photos, receipts, and contracts detailed transfers of money I had never been allowed to see, gifts exchanged under the table, and subtle manipulations meant to discredit me at every turn. There were also conversations between my sister and a high lawyer discussing ways to legally marginalize me, including hidden clauses in the will and secret accounts in my name I never controlled. I stared at the screen, shaking. Every lie they had told, every carefully constructed narrative about my failures, had a paper trail proving their orchestration. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was calculated, financial, and ruthless. Alex had anticipated my shock. "Start with the timeline," he said. "Look at how each action was planned, how every event was manipulated. Then connect the dots. The story they've told the world is a fabrication, but these documents don't lie." And he was right. As I pieced together the timeline, the patterns became horrifyingly clear. They had plotted my erasure for years, undermining my reputation at work, isolating me socially, and even orchestrating small accidents to make me doubt myself. What I had taken for bad luck was meticulously engineered cruelty. But buried deeper were things that shocked me even more. Emails my father had written to my sister expressing guilt but insisting I remain excluded, and texts from extended family members subtly reinforcing the narrative that I was the problem. The scope of their conspiracy was wider than I could have imagined. I spent hours going through the files, annotating, cross-referencing, connecting every lie to its source. By dawn, I had a dossier that could not only expose the truth, but also protect me from any further attempts to manipulate reality. I realized then that the power had shifted. For the first time, I held the story, the undeniable truth, in my hands. Yet, even as I felt a surge of determination, a creeping fear settled in. The family I once loved now faced exposure, and I knew that revealing the evidence would spark chaos, anger, and confrontation. The question wasn't whether they would react, it was how violently. As the morning sun seeped through my blinds, I closed the laptop and took a deep breath. The evidence was ready, and so was I. The next step would take all my courage, confronting them, facing their denials, and forcing them to see the truth. But I wouldn't do it alone. With Alex by my side, the reckoning was inevitable. I remember the moment I walked into the living room like it was a movie, my hands gripping the dossier so tightly it felt like it might crumble. Every eye in the room turned to me. My family, the people I had once trusted more than anyone, sat frozen, caught between confusion and recognition. I didn't hesitate. I laid the evidence on the table, letting the weight of every document speak before I even opened my mouth. "This," I began, my voice steady but cold, "is everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every calculated move meant to erase me." My sister scoffed, the first flicker of defiance I expected. "You've lost it," she said, but her eyes betrayed her. She scanned the documents I had exposed, her confidence cracking with each line she read. I turned to my father, who had remained quiet, his hands nervously fidgeting. "You knew," I said. "You knew and you let it happen." He opened his mouth to reply, but the words didn't come. Instead, he glanced at the papers, at the receipts, at the emails, and then finally at me. The truth had a way of silencing even the most practiced denials. My mother's face went pale. "Marble, this isn't what it looks like," she stammered, but I shook my head. I had lived through the manipulation for decades. I knew exactly what it looked like. I walked through the timeline, explaining each scheme, the hidden accounts, the sabotaged opportunities, the lies told to friends and coworkers. Every carefully orchestrated betrayal was now exposed in front of them. Gasps filled the room, some defensive, some incredulous. The confrontation didn't stay quiet for long. Voices rose, accusations flew, and the veneer of civility shattered. Yet I stayed calm, letting each reaction reveal their guilt. There was no screaming, no begging, just the unrelenting clarity of evidence. When I finished, silence fell again. The weight of truth was heavy, suffocating even. My family sat there, stripped of the narratives they had clung to for years. The confrontation wasn't about punishment, I realized. It was about revelation. I had reclaimed my story, and now they had no choice but to face it. And in that moment, I understood something crucial. This confrontation was not the end, but the doorway to real change. The family I had once known could not exist in the shadow of lies. Now, it was time to decide what came next, for them and for me. Just when I thought the confrontation had exhausted every ounce of tension in the room, a single envelope slid quietly across the table, unnoticed at first. My sister's hand trembled as she reached for it, as if instinctively knowing the contents would shift everything again. I leaned forward, curiosity and caution warring inside me. Inside was a series of photographs, snapshots I had never seen before, taken years ago, long before I was erased. Faces I recognized, gestures I remembered, but the context was entirely new. The photos revealed secret meetings, hushed phone calls, and exchanges of documents I hadn't known existed. My family, the people I had spent decades trying to understand, had been entangled in layers of deceit far deeper than I had imagined. A chill ran down my spine. The betrayal wasn't just theirs. It was systemic. It was bigger than me, bigger than our household. Someone else had been pulling strings, shaping every move, orchestrating events in ways that made our family drama just one part of a far more sinister puzzle. My father broke the silence first. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Marble, you weren't the only one being played." I stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. The final twist wasn't just about exposure, it was about realization. The forces behind our lives had been hidden, silent, manipulating even those I thought were my enemies. And yet, in that revelation, I felt an unexpected surge of clarity. The truth, though more complex than I could have imagined, gave me an unshakable advantage. I had survived decades of erasure, exposure, and betrayal. I had faced the confrontation head-on, and now I held the ultimate insight, the knowledge that even the puppeteers couldn't predict how I would move next. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was strategizing. Every glance, every word, every choice in that room could now be guided by the truth I held. And in that moment, I knew. The story wasn't over, but the tide had finally turned in my favor. The final twist had unveiled the deeper game, but it also set the stage for what I would do next. Reclaiming my life meant not only facing my family, but confronting the hidden forces that had shaped our entire world. And that journey, the reckoning, was only just beginning. The morning sunlight spilled across my apartment like a quiet promise. For the first time in decades, I felt unshackled, not by distance or circumstance, but by the truth finally resting in my hands. The weight I had carried since the day I was erased had begun to lift, replaced by a clarity I didn't know I could feel. I poured a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the world wake up. Outside, life continued with its familiar rhythms, but inside me, everything had changed. I was no longer the ghost my family had tried to make me. I was whole, aware, and free. The confrontation, the evidence, the betrayals, they all led me here. Every lie exposed, every secret unearthed, every moment of silence endured had prepared me for this dawn. I realized freedom isn't just about escaping the past. It's about reclaiming your voice, your choices, and your power. And yet, the journey ahead wasn't about vengeance or punishment. It was about living on my own terms, shaping my future, without the shadows of manipulation hanging over me. The knowledge of what had transpired gave me strength, not anger. It reminded me that I could choose my path, and that I didn't have to be defined by the cruelty of others. As I stepped out into the morning air, I felt the crisp wind against my face, a reminder that life, with all its chaos and unpredictability, was mine to experience fully. The past had tried to erase me, but in surviving it, I discovered a truth more profound than any betrayal. Resilience can't be taken, and so, with every step forward, I embraced this newfound freedom. I wasn't just returning to life. I was entering it as someone reborn, someone unstoppable, someone who had finally claimed the narrative of her own story. The dawn of freedom wasn't just an ending, it was the beginning of everything I had ever wanted to live for. Sometimes the people who try to erase you only make you stronger. I survived, I reclaimed my life, and now my story belongs to me. If you were captivated by this journey, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to follow. More true stories of mystery, betrayal, and resilience. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next.